Welcome to eCTD training at AfriSummit. Welcome everybody to the eCTD webinar hosted by AfriSummit in collaboration with Lawrence Life Science Group, supported by Vector Life Sciences, the workshop sponsor for eCTD training at AfriSummit 2023. I'm Marjorie Wilson, the manager and producer of the third AfriSummit, and that will be taking place in Cairo, 8th to 11th of October, connecting national regulatory authorities and industry, covering 2 days of pharma and 2 days of medical device, discussing regulations of African countries to support the access and growth of these markets. Today, we embark on a journey into the world of electronic common technical documents, where innovation meets regulatory compliance in the life science industry. As we gather here, we are united by a common goal to explore the latest developments, best practices, and cutting-edge solutions that are transforming the way we approach regulatory submissions. We have the privilege of hearing from Mr. Kent Briggs, Managing Director of Vector Life Sciences. Mr. Kent Briggs began working with eSubmissions in 2022 and eCTDs when they were first implemented. He has provided industry workshops in the US, Canada, Europe, South Africa, India, and Australia, and has performed application training with both big and small pharmaceutical companies around the world. I would like to also welcome our moderator for the webinar, Mr. Charles Leibrand, partner at Vector Life Sciences. And Charles is responsible for the overall business development and the strategic growth of products and markets. He gained his experience in the electrical and automotive arena, where he fulfilled his role as managing director in South Africa and Zambia. Our warmest welcome to each and every one of you, and we thank Lawrence Life Science and Vector Life Sciences for their invaluable support in making this event possible. Kent, welcome to the webinar.
Thank you very much. Just a slight correction. I've been involved since 2002, not since 2022. A little bit of a difference. A number of years, but yes.
You're so young, I didn't realize, I'm sorry.
No, not really. Okay, so welcome everybody. I'd like to get started with this, and so let me just share my screen. So today we want to talk about the importance of eCTD in Africa. We're looking at it from both an authority and industry perspectives. There are advantages from both sides. And we want to encourage the use of eCTD and why it's important from an industry perspective, but also looking at some of where we are with these kind of submissions. Africa is much further along than some of the other regions in the world. For example, Asia and South America, which is not quite as cohesive and has not completely moved over to the CTD structure that ICH promotes. So moving from for us to move to eCTD, it's a little bit easier. So to get started, I just want to go through. We're going to look at the road to eCTD, the benefits for the authorities, the benefits for industry. Looking at a harmonized Africa, I'll have a short note on eCTD 4.0. And then we'll take some questions towards the end. So the road to eCTD in Africa, what's been done, what has not been done, and what needs to be done. So for this, we're going to look at a few examples from the guidance on how we have been instructing industry to provide electronic submissions up until now. So I'm not naming names or pointing fingers at any countries, but the examples like summaries and application form in Word format and body data in PDF format. And that's in many cases, this is truly the only mentioning of how the electronic content should be provided. One hard copy of the product dossier should be submitted along with electronic copy, and the application form and the DOS PD should always be in electronic Word format. Electronic submissions of documentation on electronic storage media, like a CD or a DVD, should be submitted in Microsoft Word. That's required for the QUAS PD, the QUIS, and BTIF, or text selectable PDF format for the other documentation. To be submitted, and this is even in parentheses, so it's not even a bold statement, but to be submitted as one original hard copy and one electronic copy in PDF on a CD-ROM, including modules 1 and 2 and MS Word. Guidance on eCTD submissions will be provided in the future. We're going eCTD only. And that last one actually caused quite a bit of ruckus in the world, because they weren't necessarily going eCTD. They were going to be taking electronic files for CTD. And then around the world, everybody's asking, where are the specifications? Where are the specifications? Because eCTD is a very defined format. So we want to try and kind of understand how do we get to a more elaborate discussion on what kind of what is an electronic submission. And first, we need to kind of understand what is an unstructured electronic submission. So an unstructured electronic submission has unpredictable formats. In the examples that we just went through, we basically only had examples that were telling us about the file type. So it did tell us about what needed to be in Word and in PDF. And that's maybe the first step towards it, but there was no mention of granularity, other than the fact that it named a few files, the QUAS, the QUIS, the DTIF by name. So assumingly we would be providing those files separately. But where the file starts and where it ends, we've seen examples throughout the authorities in Africa where entire module 3 is provided as one PDF file. And on top of that, there's no navigation support within it. So there's no bookmarks for you to be able to navigate to the different sections of the module 3. The construction of the package is not defined. So in an e-submission like a NIS or that has been used in Europe and in Saudi Arabia, the GCC, in Australia, there's a file and folder naming convention. In the guidance that we just saw, there's no mention of how the files and the folders should be presented, and what any kind of construction should look like. In an eCTD, we don't care about the folders and the file names. I mean, there are recommended ones by ICH, but they're always in italics, and they're just recommended. They're not mandatory. In an eCTD, we have something called an XML element, which is a descriptor in an XML file that actually defines each piece of information that is being provided. But then there's metadata for processing. So when I receive something, I want to be able to have a machine read it and understand who is the applicant, what is the application number, what is the proposed product name. There's information that we use to categorize and classify the applications, and that's usually provided in perhaps a form in the cover letter, but we need that in a machine readable format. So we need metadata for processing. And the issue is that submissions are at the core of what we do. So without a clear definition of the submission package that needs to be provided, neither the authority or the applicant can reach their full potential of efficiency. So the applicant doesn't know from one country to the next. There isn't consistency with it, or there may be different requirements from one country to the next. So a structured electronic submission is the direction that we want to go. We want everything organized, everything in its place, in its defined location. And we want to make sure that we can find things. So in order to do that, we need to have a predictable format and content. We need to define the granularity, and this is done with the annex, the granularity annex that is provided by ICH for modules 2 through 5. But the content that we're expecting on a regional section within module 1 needs to be defined. When does a document start, and when does it end? When do you move on to the next item? And it sounds fairly basic, but in fact, many publishing tools out there, they will produce printable items. And what we find at the authorities is that it's the printable PDF that they're actually being given, and that might entail the entire folder that used to be provided to us in a paper. Then only without the bookmarks, they don't have the tab sheets that would have been provided in the paper applications before. So the navigation through these files can become very cumbersome. We need the identifiers of it. So we need to be able to identify the content. I mean, in an eCTD, that's identified through the XML elements, as we just mentioned. And in an eSubmission, it's identified through the folder and the file names. But then we want to know, what are your PDF requirements? We want to be able to check the quality of the PDFs. So then there are requirements set out for the properties. What version of PDF should be given? What should the bookmarks be showing when they bring in? Should there even be bookmarks? Should we be checking for navigation? In many of the regions, check if a file is larger than a certain size, then they expect to have bookmarks within those files. And then we want to make sure that there's no file protection, no passwords or anything that have been applied to the file, or any kind of restrictions, for example, copying and pasting content out of a file for our evaluation reports. So the file security is also provided in a structured submission. We can create the MD5 checksums and ensure that the files are not tampered with, and it is a part of those specifications. So a structured submission is very predictable, and that is perhaps the most important part of it. So to understand what eCTD is, we need to differentiate it and understand what CTD is. So CTD is the content structure. For example, it's the outline. It's a content guidance provided by the region, because the module 1 it needs to be defined by the region. And so if you have, for example, something like a table of contents of lifecycle operations, what is that? And you need to describe what that is in the content guidance. So there may be unique items that need to be done, and we might provide examples if we're expecting certain tables to be provided. If you want to put it forth templates, for example, on how the registration status in other countries might look, if that was a part of your regional content that was defined. And the regional guidance is essential. So many countries have forgotten the fact that it's not just module 1 that needs to be defined, but also the regional section 2.3R and 3.2R. What are the expectations of 3.2R? What content must be placed there? The most important thing that is the CTD is not format specific, and we need to understand the difference between CTD and eCTD. So the CTD could be provided in a paper, it could be in an unstructured electronic files, as has been requested in the guidance around Africa so far. It could be in an eSubmission, in something like the NIS that was provided, or it's an eCTD. So we can go from paper to unstructured to a structured submission to eCTD. Any kind of format could be used for the CTD. When we get to the eCTD is an internationally defined standardized electronic format used together with the internationally defined standardized CTD structure. It's used for medical products as defined in the CTD guidance issued by ICH, with regional structure added by regions in regional guidance. That's a fairly long sentence, but it describes exactly where we are with that. And the most important thing to understand is what eCTD is its format. When we talk about eCTD, we are talking about an internationally defined format. How the content that we define for our regional section should be provided in electronic format. So structure versus format. The necessary guidance that would be required would be, from a structure standpoint, we want to know what do we need to deliver? What is the outline, and what is the content expected? For example, as I mentioned, if there are tables, you may give examples of how those tables should look, give templates along the lines. So it's a content guidance. What should be explained? What should be covered in each of the documents? what is expected when you're reviewing the documents, what will you be looking for within the documents. It's content guidance. It's and for the evaluation. And there may be a CTD guidance that goes along with it. Many regions have provided CTD guidance that explain this is what we expect in this section. And if it's not covered in the guidance, then there are Q&A documents that can be used to actually clarify certain things between updates of the actual specifications and guidance. Format is how we deliver it. So it's the technical parameters around the content. And this might be the eCTD specifications. It might be an eSubmission specification, which would definitely would define exactly what every folder and every file name needs to be called, or at least the fixed part of the file name. Most will then have a variable. If you're providing multiple files in a section, then you have a variable to differentiate those within the eSubmission. And there's a validation criteria. Now that we have a predictable structure, we actually can check it. We can look over it and we can see is that file, does it exist? Has it been provided? We can create rules that say that if it's this type of a submission, that these files must be provided. We can create rules that prevent you from combining too many submission types in one submission. And that validation criteria then really gives us the benefit both on the industry and on the authority side for us to improve the quality of the applications long before they are even submitted. And the QA guidance on the technical, it grows between the versions of the specifications. It's a living document that's constantly providing feedback to the industry. So the benefits for the authority, why authority should move to adopt eCTD and structured eSubmissions as the only formats accepted, meaning that we no longer accept any unstructured submissions moving forward. The benefits for the authorities, well, it's going to improve the communication with the applicants. It's predictable content, so we can validate it. It makes the evaluation more efficient. It allows for commercial off-the-shelf solutions for submission management and evaluation because we're dealing with a format that has been dealt with by other authorities. So there are solutions on the market that automatically enable us to do that. And it enables process automation. So if it's a predictable content, then we can go about and processing the submissions by creating essentially automated rules. The better communication with applicants, we better understand the content expectations of the applications. So that means that I'm not wondering, what do I need for this country versus what do I need for that country? It's spelled out very clearly, and the guidance that normally would be there when we move to a more structured. You'll have the CT guidance, the eCTD specifications, eSubmission specifications, the validation criteria, the Q&A document. And then when we move to these, there's usually an eCTD that is set up specifically for questions on the eCTDs and for eSubmissions. But what's important with all of those items is that we're giving the industry the ability to self-validate their sequences, which means there's going to be fewer sequences that we receive that won't pass our screening process. So the predictable content, the validation for it is it automatically validates the checklists. Many of us have checklists, and we go through them laboriously to see, is this there? Have they done this? The industry has to spend a lot of time filling out checklists. It becomes part of the module 1 of the checklist, but these can be largely eliminated through automatic checks. It's going to check the quality, so it's going to do the PDF analysis of it, as we mentioned before, looking for bookmarks or hyperlinks or the properties of an item. And it can also do the content validation. So more and more of the authorities are implementing something called a document matrix. This was first done by Australia, followed then most recently by Singapore, and now coming up with the specifications that will be released in the near future for Ecowas. They also have implemented a document matrix that basically defines that if you're submitting this type of a submission, these are the mandatory documents that must be included. The submission type matrix then tells you whether or not you can combine your different types of submissions. So many of us have the habit of sending a package of information and saying we want to do this, this, and this. But the more things that we combine in the package, the more confusing it gets for the evaluation. So the submission type matrix will manage what you're allowed to combine in a single package of information submitted to the authority. The validation gives us different varying results. We can have an error, we can have a warning, and we can have information. So if an error comes up, if for example, the rule is that you must have a cover letter and you are missing a cover letter, it would cause an error and your submission would be automatically rejected. If it's a warning, it means that it's a best practice. It's going to have a negative effect on the evaluation, but we will let it through if the warnings are not severe. And so it may pass the validation, but what would happen is that in screening, if the warnings are excessive, you may be asked to submit a new sequence correcting the issues that have been there. And then there's information that is being collected. For example, if you're reusing content from other submissions, then that information is collected and shown as a list so that the screener is aware of what information has already been submitted in other applications, so that there's a reduced requirement for validation. The evaluation efficiency, we've got screening requirements are drastically reduced through the automated validation. There's a consistency. Every application has the same look and feel, which is not something that we can say we can say right now, because every company is kind of giving their own granularity. I'm sure many applications more and more are following the ICH granularity because they're reutilizing applications submitted elsewhere, but this hasn't always been the case. So there's no more searching for content. It's extremely predictable where you find content. There's no varying structures on the granularity. You know exactly what kind of bookmarks to expect when you get to certain files. There's lifecycle management, and the lifecycle management is a layered information. So each package of information that is submitted produces another layer on the information that is processed. If you look at it almost like a multi-tier cake, you can take a look at each layer on its own, or you can take a look at multiple layers together, or you can look at the entire application. You can pull layers out. For example, if there was rejected packages of information, you could exclude them from the view. So there are multiple different views that you can apply to the life cycle, which gives you the ability to immediately look at the approved status of an application. So when you remove withdrawals and layers that have been withdrawn, layers that have been rejected, layers that are under evaluation currently, then the only thing left are the approved portions, and you can quickly, with a click of a button in most systems, you would be able to then indicate what is your approved application. Content reuse, so using content that was submitted in another eCTD is very easy to do. You can reference the content. If you submit an API in the same manufacturer and the content has already been submitted to the authority, instead of resubmitting the content, you can actually reference the content from the other applications. And within the eCTD, it will look and feel like it's all together, but you'll have a report from the validation that would indicate that this has already been, this is part of an application, that application has already been evaluated, and so it reduces the burden on your evaluation. There's much more transparency when you move to an electronic submission. Most systems, they will be compliant with the data protection laws or the data requirements around the world, things like 21 Part 11, or there's the GAMP 5, And those require audit trails and the ability to actually see what has happened within it. You can see who has evaluated content. You can see what they've looked at during the evaluation. And so there's a lot more transparency in the evaluation. It's easier to predict the time required to evaluate. Once we get into the same, every application looking the same, we'll know that for that particular submission type, it generally takes this amount of time. That means once we can predict the time, we can implement consistent evaluation processes. We can give consistent timelines to industry. So the commercial off-the-shelf solutions, it allows you to not have to reinvent the wheel. It allows you to use your IT resources more effectively, and you benefit from the other authority enhancements. So you would constantly be chasing what other authorities might have, what you've heard other authorities have done if you develop your own system. But taking it off of a COTS solution means that you're benefiting from the solutions that have been asked from other authorities. And so one solution means that those enhancements are rolled out to you as you go through. Commercial support and services from expert. You've got data security, audit trails, who did what when. There's no open access to files via file structure, which is much of the problem with the unstructured submissions that are provided. You don't know where copies are made. You don't have an audit trail that shows that copies were made of items. And so there's very little data protection from the authority standpoint on that. We access via the review to a solution controlled via the evaluation process or the review assignments. There's the functionality to manage that. And the MD5 checksums are there to ensure that content is not tampered with. So there's automation processes. You have content that might be coming in through a portal, and then it gets processed from the portal. It gets validated. It gets assigned to an evaluation team. There is the evaluation that takes place. Then the evaluation reports are created. Those reports are then brought in, are pulled together to create almost a package for communication for the applicant, and then an application would be archived. But this process can be automated when we're dealing with consistent packages. So if the same information is provided, and for example, in an eCTD, we might have an envelope section. In an eSubmission, we might have an envelope XML, similar to what Australia has implemented for their NIS, and what Ecowas is implementing, will be implementing in their eSubmission. You can automate it. So portal processes, applicant communication, evaluation, team assignments, evaluation results, the compilation of reports. All of these items we can create processes so that those would be automated. So the benefits from industry, well, I think that they're very well linked with the authority. So the better communication with the authority, it's a two-way street. The ability to self-validate prior to submission means that you don't have to resubmit something due to deficiencies. The compilation, there's huge compilation efficiencies, and we can expect data security, which is incredibly important when we're dealing with our own intellectual property. So the better communication with the authorities, complete set of guidance, as we mentioned before. We understand what is required. There's improved lines of communication with dedicated emails for eCTD, Q&A documents which is a living document, so it's constantly growing as questions come in. We've got predictable timelines, evaluation timelines. So as the efficiencies go on the authority, we're gonna see that coming through in improved evaluation timelines. Automatically efficiency from one end to the next. As that is shortened, then it's a huge benefit. I mean, every day that our products are not on the market is costing us money. So we want to see shortened evaluation times on both sides of the industry, but at the same time, we want to ensure the ability to maintain the quality of review on the authority standpoint side. So the abilities to self-validate the submissions, that is probably one of the biggest advantages for the industry. So they validate their own submission prior to submitting it. They save time, they reduce the iterations due to deficiencies. They know that they're not missing things. They know that their application is meeting the expectations. And if it passes on your side, the general rule by authorities accepting eCTD is that it is accepted. You know that if it passes on your side, it's going to pass on their side. They will accept it. Now, they may find in the screening some additional deficiencies. They may open up a document and see that you didn't follow the content guidance of what would be expected within the document, and ask you to submit a new sequence to your submission that would then replace the documents that were deficient. There's a SMART validation criteria provided by the document matrix and the submission type matrix, as we mentioned before. So it makes sure that we have all the documents there that we need for a particular submission type. We use the same validation check that's used by the authority. So we're also ensured that we're going to get the same results, because it's a published criteria. And while different tools may have slight differences in interpretation, what we find is that over time that they come together and they're very much the same, regardless of what tool that you might be using. But there are free validation tools available on the market, so there's no additional cost to the applicants to be able to do this. It becomes a service. By doing this, you're making yourself more efficient, and you're making the industry more efficient. The ability to self-validate your submissions is probably the single biggest advantage that we have for the industry. The compilation efficiency, though, putting the pieces together that are required for that application. When you're moving into an eCTD, then you're looking at probably getting a COTS solution, something that's available on the market that helps you to compile those. Once you start organizing your documents for the electronic submissions, you'll automatically see an improved document management. And if you go into a system, whether it's a document management that is integrated within a submission management solution, or whether it's a document management that is separate and interfaces with a submission management, you're going to find that you have an improved document management. You have access control, version control, content reuse abilities, and you'll be able to manage your content much better. You'll have a much better overview of what you have, what kind of documents that you have, and where you're using them. From a compilation standpoint, when you're using a COTS solution, there are solutions available in every price range, so it does not have to be a costly item. Now, if we were to move into eCTD 4.0, which I'll cover that in a little bit later, it may become costly, right? The solutions for 4.0 are limited on the market, and therefore we don't have as many low-cost solutions for the 4.0. But the eCTD 3.2.2, which is very much alive and the current standard in every authority around the world right now, there are solutions there that from very low cost solutions to very higher level cost solutions that have all the bells and whistles that you could possibly dream of. The things like automatic compilation. So the fact that you have your documents all organized and put into a system, an advanced system will know exactly what to do with the documents, and it will automatically compile the eCTD. We are looking for submission transparency. We want to know an organized record of the content submitted. We want an audit trail. We want to know who has compiled what, when, and who made the changes, especially in life cycle. So we gain efficiencies on this side of the industry by increasing a tremendous amount of efficiency, but also data security. So we can control the access for all the content, ensuring that only those that are supposed to access the content can. We can access what type of manage what type of access that they should have. There are audit trail reports of changes that are made, so you can always go back and see how the changes are done. And for every sequence produced, we have MD5 checksums that will ensure that the content is not tampered with. So I want to move on and talk about a future harmonized Africa, one eCTD, one harmonized continent. We are in regions right now, and that is where we are currently in the state of bringing things together. But with the development of the AMA, this may change moving forward. So we have the eCTD with Module 1 and the country and the regional and the continent harmonization on that. Modules 2 through 5 are global, so from an ICH standpoint. ICH is in charge of the global harmonization, but we have the AMRH and the African Medicines Agency that are promoting a continental harmonization. Whereas then we have the different regions that are looking for regional harmonization. We have successful joint reviews, the Zazibona in SADC joint review. We have the joint review also in the EAC that has been very successful. We have WAHU that has the centralized procedures for a certain defined basket of goods. And these types of harmonization or reliance type of procedures where we are working together increases our ability to accept each other's results. So there are country requirements, and an eCTD should allow for the country requirements. If you look at even the GCC and the EU for those types of regions, they have allowed for additional data in certain sections. The Ecowas has done the same to make the structure more flexible, and so that country-specific requirements can still be met by a harmonized general eCTD or CTD structure. If we harmonize, the harmonization leads to an improved reliance capability. We have the same requirements, the same content, which will lead to developing similar, if not the same, processes. And if we all have the same requirements, content, and processes, then we can trust each other's results much more, which means that we can rely on the results that are given. This is a huge resource advantage for authorities. It's a huge for the evaluation and approval of submissions, but it also is a huge advantage for the industry for the creation of submissions, because it means that they can reuse the same submission again and again, or actually just use one submission for a centralized procedure and not have to reproduce national procedures again. It increases our capacity to provide quality medicines to the African population. If we share the workload, then we're able to specialize ourselves. I know that even within the EU, there are certain agencies that are a little bit more that they're specialized in certain areas, and you may want to do your mutual recognition procedure in those certain areas, so that you have a more qualified and maybe a more efficient evaluation during that. And the same thing would happen to a harmonized Africa or the harmonized regions within Africa. So just quickly want to talk about eCTD 4.0. When do we implement and why not now? There's a lot of questions that come up around the continent. I know that in the very, very beginning, the Ecowas was putting together the documentation based on the 4.0 specifications. ICH has released those, but it's not yet the time. The benefits of eCTD will be an improved content reuse, so reusing content from other submissions. It will enable a two-way communication so that authorities can actually communicate back to the applicant using an eCTD sequence. It's streamlining the technical backbone, so it's combining the ICH and the regional XML files. And it's utilizing the RPS construction. RPS is a regulated product submission, and it's a generalized specification that can be applied to any structure. So the RPS is, for example, for medical devices, the IMDRF structure was actually designed and intended to be used with the RPS. However, there's been a delay in that because they want RPS first to be implemented the eCTD, and that would be eCTD 4.0 before moving forward with the RPS on the IMDRF structure. So it's flexible and it can be applied to any structure. The IMDRF is one, but you could be used for veterinary. It could be used for cosmetics. It can be used for any line of structure that we would want to apply that to. But why not now? Right? The specifications are out, but the pieces are only now falling into place. So the testing has only just begun in some of the eCTD experience regions. This year, the US is beginning to pilot them. Japan started in, I think, the Q4 of last year to pilot them, but it's still in a pilot phase in most of these countries. Yeah? And when you talk to some of the countries that haven't gotten really involved yet, they talk about that. They say that 3.2 works. So why tamper with a system that works? And I think that they're worried about rocking the boat with that. So more solutions are available for 3.2. So it means that it's more affordable. There's more competition. From an industry standpoint, we want to make the slide into an eCTD much easier. We want to make selecting a system as easy and affordable as possible for the local industry. The global industry is already equipped with 3.2, those that have eCTD solutions. So we want to make adoption of our specification as easy as possible for the applicants submitting eCTD in other regions. If we were to go with 4.0, many of those that are able to create eCTDs would not be able to create the eCTDs for us. They're not equipped yet to be able to produce a 4.0. So the idea is that we wait for 4.0 to be established and more commonly adopt among the other regions. So just according to the ICH website, the 4.0, here are the timelines. The EU is piloting the beginning implementation in 2025, but won't be mandatory for the centralized procedure until 2027, and it hasn't even been determined for the mutual recognition when it will be mandatory. Switzerland will begin piloting in 24, implement in 25, and only make it mandatory in 29. US FDA, as I said, is starting this year. They'll start implementing next year, and they'll only make it mandatory in 2029. Canada, 2027. Australia has not determined yet, although they are leaning more towards an implementation in 2025 to begin that. But when it will be mandatory still needs to be determined. The same with Brazil. Brazil is one of the agencies that has indicated that they want to start with 4.0. But they will then only pilot it in 2024 and start along with a pilot. Japan it started in 21, and they're wanting to make it mandatory by 26. Korea is on the 29th. So we're looking at the more experienced eCTD countries in general are not planning on making this mandatory until just before 2030. And with that, there's so much to learn from this. We think that in Africa, it will be much easier for us to go with the status quo and allow the kinks to be worked out by the more experienced customers. So on a final note, I just want to mention, we've talked about eCTD this whole time, but there is the submission, and there has been mention of guidance for the eSubmission. The eSubmission is a stepping stone to eCTD. And if you talk to some of the countries that has actually produced it, they will tell you it needs to be extremely clear that it's a temporary solution. It is not a long-term solution, but it does actually bring most of the requirements for eCTD, which are integrated into it. So we can do a validation for PDF analysis, document granularity. We can provide the metadata that would normally be done. As I mentioned, that there's an envelope XML that Australia requires, and that Ecowas will also be requiring. That will be part of that, so that it can be worked out on and through electronics, machinal produced or automatically processed. But it doesn't have everything that eCTD does. And the main thing is that lifecycle management, the layers. Every sequence is by itself, just like the paper was. And so it's not an advantage. We don't have an advantage long term, and therefore it needs to be a temporary stepping stone while companies have the opportunity to move into an eCTD solution. eSubmissions don't have to require any additional software. It can be utilized. They can be created with using the file explorer and being able to produce the PDFs and the words that are required. You just simply will name them in the way that they're required to be named. So the eSubmissions are encouraged, but they must be designated as temporary from the beginning. So the longer it's used, the more sequences that are provided, the more difficult the evaluation will become. And we don't want to sit in a situation that Europe had or where Australia has had, where they have a hard time getting rid of the submission. They get deep into their submissions, and they actually have a rather inefficient evaluation of their content once the life cycle becomes long. So we don't want to be stuck in the middle. We want to set the time limit and look at it as a temporary stepping stone. So that's all I have for you today. We can go into the Q&A if there's any questions.
Yeah, I've got some questions. Look at the online. Somebody just asked.
Oh, yeah. We will be doing an eCTD workshop in Cairo during the conference. And so we would encourage you to come and join and actually see firsthand how the eCTD would be utilized, and how the eCTD and the layers of the eCTD would be an advantage both for the evaluation and for the compilation. So we will be putting something together, and we will be evaluating something within that workshop.
Okay, I just want to ask you some of the questions, Kate. Let's see if I am on screen. I'm on screen there. We will be sharing presentations. Somebody's also looking to be sharing presentation with them.
Yes.
And the eCTD format, somebody asked about the eCTD format. If we can share that, it is available on the ICH website, but we can also send you a link on that. Let's see. Good. Can you guys hear me now? Okay.
Yes,
also,
we can hear you loud and clear.
Great stuff. Thank you. Does this mean that Ecowas countries are harmonized with what they need for the submissions now?
Yeah. So the questions on Ecowas, I'm going to leave that to the region to do. I mean, they are planning an industry launch, and that will be submitted. That will be provided shortly. Information on that, but I'm going to leave that to Ecowas and Wahoo to do the announcements on those.
Okay, which countries are already using eCTD? I'm not sure if you mean in Africa specifically or internationally, but you can just maybe start with Africa and just move your way up to.
Okay, I mean, South Africa is the only country in Africa that is using eCTD, and they have gone to an eCTD only approach. So they are no longer accepting the eSubmissions or any paper applications. They started their eCTD journey in 2013, but in 2019 they accelerated during the backlog pilot, and then when the pandemic hit, then they went to electronic only and stopped accepting paper, and that kind of accelerated the electronic, so that didn't have to be any face-to-face. As far as other countries, we're looking at in North America, the US and Canada. In Europe, it's basically the European Union, or the European Economic Area, essentially. So that does include, for example, Norway. It also, I think, Iceland, and then we also have Switzerland that is there. Then we have the GCC, which is in the Middle East. It's the GCC is the Gulf Cooperation Council. And then beyond that, there's Jordan that also has that. Thailand, is eCTD. Singapore is in the process of implementing it. They provided industry with a draft for comment about 2 months ago. The comments have been closed there, and they're busy then finalizing their 1.0 specifications. Australia is utilizing eCTD. Japan is on eCTD. China and Korea are on eCTD. So those are the main countries around the world that are on there, and Ecowas is planning to join later this year. But as I said, the exact timelines will be provided by Ecowas.
Thank you, Ken. Then another question is, maybe just run past, how do you see harmonization will make access to medicines easier, mainly if mutual recognition is applicable? I'm not quite sure of the question.
Yeah, well, I mean, it reduces the amount of effort that a company needs to go through to actually get something. So if we are harmonized, and we can increase either the reliance model, which is the mutual recognition module, we refer to it as a reliance model in Africa. But if we're working with a reliance model, or if we're working with more of a centralized review within the joint review of the EAC or the Zazivona in SADC, while it doesn't follow the same process that the Ecowas centralized procedure has, in the sense that the Ecowas has a centralized procedure where they approve a certain bundle of goods, which can only be submitted via the centralized procedure, and then it is reviewed on behalf of the region. The others, there's a joint review, and the results of the review go back to the individual countries, and the individual countries then will take the recommendations and implement it as they see fit. I don't believe that there's an example to date of a country not following suit on that. So anytime we enter one of these, we're making it much easier for us to do one application and have other countries then rely on that. We've currently had 3 authorities in Africa: Tanzania, Ghana, and Nigeria, that have hit the level 3 WHO certification, and that makes them what used to be referred to, I think, as a stringent authority. It means that the results of their reviews can be trusted. And I know that there are other countries on the continent that are seeking that same level of certification. So the more that we have countries that have that level of certification, the more that we can rely on the results of those countries, and reduce the efforts to actually have to repeat the same review in country after country.
And then the last question that I have, unless there's other questions that just came in, will the African Medicine Agency propose harmonization and make eCTD mandatory?
No, I don't see that happening anytime soon. It may happen sometime in the future. I don't believe this. While this is something that is being watched, there isn't a specific program at the AMA that I'm aware of that is pushing the eCTD. This is something that is happening at kind of grassroots. I know that it has been discussed in the IMS meetings for NAPAD, and I know that there are discussions of it, but there certainly isn't any concrete plans yet. This is still being dealt with on a regional level, and Ecowas is probably the region that is the furthest along with that, because they have developed eCTD specifications that will be released to industry here shortly. So I mean, we were involved. There's a press release that's out. We were involved in a training last week with Ecowas, in which we did training of all 15 countries on the eCTD, and so the next step after that is to actually then do a launch to industry.
Okay, Mara, I think that also then answers your questions on, or your question on when is eCTD expected to be implemented in Africa. Effectively, we're going country by country and region by region. And as Ken just explained, Ecowas was the first region to start off as a region to create an eCTD specification, which we created for them. Is there any other questions?
Thank you very much, Kent and Charles. I'd like to hand over to Robbie, who will do final closing comments, and we really appreciated all the information. Thank you, everybody, for your interactive questions. Over to Robbie.
Thank you, everyone, for joining, and thank you, Kent, for the amazing and informative information which you provided for eCTD. And Charles, it was amazing to have you on board, and thank you so much for your assistance. Thank you, everyone, again, and Madre, of course, for making this happen. And I just wanted to kind of really remind you all that eCTD doors are opened, the eCTD training for AfriSummit, which you can now go and register to and attend in Cairo. And please don't forget to follow our social media pages. I will leave them right now in the chat for you to stay connected with us and stay informed with all of the sessions and all of the updates that are going to happen for AfriSummit. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everybody. Goodbye.
Thank you, everybody.
Also, if you could play video.